In October 2023, a routine auction in Boston led two collectors, Emma Richardson and Jake Sullivan, to a discovery that would fundamentally reshape their view of 19th-century photography. They had attended the sale of the W. Moore family estate, hoping to find vintage photo albums for their antiques business. Lot 247 appeared unremarkable, 6 Victorian-era family albums priced at $350. Yet, upon closer inspection of their purchase, they uncovered an unexpected treasure, a black leather album with faded gold lettering that read, Sate. Mary's Children's Home, 1888. As they opened it, the pages let out a soft crackle, revealing sepia-toned images of orphanage children. The youngsters stood in neat rows, clad in plain uniforms, their expressions sober in keeping with the photographic norms of the period. Emma, who had reviewed countless similar images of institutionalized children used for administrative documentation or fundraising, remarked on how typical these photographs seemed. But when she turned to page 23, something gave her pause. A group photograph showed roughly 40 children arranged before a brick building. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, yet something in the backdrop unsettled her. Looking more intently, she noticed one boy whose expression struck her as oddly contemporary. Jake, look at this child in the back, Emma said, gesturing toward the figure. His posture and expression don't belong to this era. Jake moved in for a closer look. The boy wore a relaxed, casual smile, utterly unlike the rigid seriousness of the other children. His eyes met the camera with a self-assurance uncommon among orphanage children in 1888. Jake admitted it was odd, but suggested he might simply have been naturally photogenic. Still, Emma couldn't dismiss the nagging feeling that there was more to the story. Their quest for answers began in earnest. Emma and Jake opted to scan the photograph at high resolution, allowing them to magnify the image and examine it with painstaking detail. What they uncovered only deepened their confusion. The boy who had drawn their attention not only had an anachronistic expression, but also clutched something in his hand that was clearly out of place for 1888. A small, rectangular object reminiscent of a modern gadget. Jake adjusted the contrast and murmured in disbelief, wondering aloud if it could be a mobile phone. Emma scrutinized the item carefully. It was compact, rectangular, and appeared to have a smooth, glossy surface. While the 1888 image quality prevented absolute clarity, the shape was undeniably contemporary. She concluded it couldn't be a phone, but it was certainly not something that existed in the 19th century. They entertained various rational possibilities. A photographic plate, a pocket mirror, or a development artifact. But the more they studied it, the more persuaded they became that the object was anachronistic. They resolved to consult specialists in historical photography. Dr. Robert Chen, a Harvard professor of photography history, agreed to analyze the image. He confirmed its authenticity, noting that the materials, processing techniques, and paper all aligned with 1888, with no indication of digital tampering. However, when Emma pressed him about the object the child held, Dr. Chen admitted it was puzzling. He couldn't identify it within the context of the era, though he cautioned that old photographs can sometimes produce anachronistic appearances due to image quality or lighting effects. Still, his explanation didn't fully satisfy Emma and Jake. They decided to dig deeper into St. Mary's Orphanage, hoping to understand the photograph's context. This investigation would unearth secrets buried for over a century. Emma and Jake visited Boston's historical archives, where archivist Margaret Foster provided them with a box of documents pertaining to the orphanage. Foster explained that St. Mary's operated from 1875 to 1923, a Catholic institution serving orphaned and abandoned children from the Boston area. The records showed the orphanage typically housed between 80 and 120 children. managed by the Sisters of Charity and funded through private donations and municipal support. But as Emma delved deeper, she uncovered something troubling. An 1889 inspection report citing irregularities in children's records and discrepancies between the number of residents reported and those actually observed. What kind of irregularities? Jake asked. Emma read aloud. During a March 15, 1889 inspection, roughly 45 children were seen in the dining room, yet official records listed only 38 residents. When questioned, the Mother Superior claimed some children were visiting potential adoptive families. Another document from 1890 contained complaints from families who had adopted children from St. Mary's, describing strange and inexplicable behaviors. One father wrote that his adopted son seemed to know things no child his age should know, especially about current events and technologies. Jake found it baffling. How could an orphan in 1890 possess knowledge of technologies from that era? The mystery deepened when they discovered the personal diary of Sister Catherine Alley, who had run the orphanage from 1885 to 1895. In 1888, she had written, "Some of our children are different. They possess knowledge and behaviors that don't correspond to their upbringing. It's as if they had lived previous, more complex lives." Emma and Jake exchanged puzzled glances. Was she suggesting that some children weren't who they appeared to be? They continued reading. Sister Alley specifically mentioned a child named Thomas, who troubled her because he occasionally spoke of flying machines and lights that operated without fire. When asked where he learned such things, he claimed to remember them from before. This description matched the boy in the photograph who had first caught their attention. Dr. Foster directed them to a special section of the archives, containing the orphanage's medical records, which were in better condition and offered more detailed insights into daily life at St. Mary's. The institution's physician, Dr. William Hartwell, had kept meticulous health records, but his notes revealed perplexing observations. Emma read from Thomas Mackenzie's 1888 medical file, which noted that although his physical development was normal, he displayed extraordinarily advanced cognitive abilities, describing medical procedures typically taught in elementary institutions. Jake found an equally disturbing file for Mary Sullivan, age 10, who during an examination described internal anatomical structures with a precision requiring advanced medical knowledge. When questioned, she claimed to remember these details from her previous family. Dr. Hartwell had documented a dozen children with similar traits between 1887 and 1891, all exhibiting exceptional intelligence, anachronistic knowledge, and a grasp of the world far beyond their formal education. He noted that these children adapted quickly to new situations and showed unusual resistance to diseases, as if their past experiences had prepared them for institutional life. Even more unsettling, Dr. Hartwell observed that these exceptional children often vanished without a trace. Of the 12 he had identified, only 3 had been officially adopted. The other 9 simply ceased to appear in the records, with no documentation of transfer or adoption. For Thomas Mackenzie, an entry noted he no longer resided at the institution as of October 20, 1890, with no adoption or transfer records. Sister Alley claimed a family had come for him, but Dr. Hartwell couldn't locate the corresponding paperwork. Emma and Jake began to suspect that something far more complex was happening at St. Mary's. These special children seemed to have mysterious origins and equally inexplicable fates. "Do you think these children were different in some way?" Jake asked. Emma studied the original photograph again and proposed an alternative. Perhaps someone had deliberately placed them there. They decided to visit the site where St. Mary's once stood. The building had been demolished in 1925, but municipal records pinpointed its location in Boston's North End. The site was now a modern condominium complex, though a small commemorative plaque briefly acknowledged the orphanage's history. As they examined the plaque, an elderly resident named Michael O'Brien approached them. He mentioned that his grandfather had lived on the street when the orphanage was still there, and had always told strange tales about the place. Emma and Jake pressed him for details. O'Brien said his grandfather occasionally saw children entering and leaving the building at odd hours, dressed differently from the others, and sometimes noticed lights in the windows long after bedtime. O'Brien invited them to his home to share family documents. His grandfather, a merchant in the area, had kept detailed records of neighborhood activities. One diary entry from September 15, 1889, described seeing unknown children near the orphanage after dark, wearing unfamiliar clothes and seemingly waiting for someone. Another entry noted that the children seen during the day were different from those who appeared at night. The nocturnal ones seemed more alert and less institutionalized in their behavior. When Jake inquired about further records, O'Brien produced a box of family papers, including correspondence between his grandfather and other merchants. A letter from 1890 mentioned that suppliers reported inconsistent orders. Some months they requested supplies for 120 children, other months for only 80, with no clear explanation for the fluctuations. Emma began to formulate a theory. What if some of the children weren't permanent residents? She mused. What if they came from somewhere else temporarily? But from where and why? Jake echoed her curiosity. The answers would require a deeper investigation into the mysteries surrounding St. Mary's. Through genealogical records, Emma and Jake managed to track down descendants of children who had lived at St. Mary's. Their first contact was Margaret Sullivan Chen, the great-granddaughter of Mary Sullivan, one of the girls mentioned in Dr. Hartwell's medical files. At a meeting in a Cambridge cafe, Margaret shared that her great-grandmother had always told unusual stories about her time at the orphanage. Stories of special visitors who would appear to help the children. Emma showed her the photograph that had sparked their investigation. Margaret studied it carefully and pointed out her great-grandmother in the second row. She then revealed something surprising. Her great-grandmother had always insisted that there were other children at the orphanage who never appeared in official photographs. What does that mean? Jake asked. Margaret explained that according to family lore, these other children arrived for short periods, usually during emergencies or crises, and seemed to know exactly what needed to be done, as if they had been there before. She elaborated that during an influenza epidemic in 1889, several children appeared who knew medical techniques the sisters didn't know, helping save many lives before vanishing once the crisis had passed. The second family they contacted provided equally intriguing information. Robert Mackenzie, a descendant of Thomas Mackenzie, had inherited family documents, including a diary Thomas had kept as an adult. In it, Thomas recalled children who arrived during difficult nights, possessing knowledge the others lacked, methods for preserving food or heating dormitories more efficiently. When asked where they came from, they said they were from other institutions, but never specified which. The third family offered the most significant clue. Jennifer Allie Walsh, a descendant of Sister Catherine Allie, had access to the nuns' personal letters, which had never been officially archived. Jennifer explained that these private letters, never meant for official records, provided a more candid account of what had occurred. In an 1888 letter, Sister Catherine wrote to her sister about special children who occasionally appeared without official documentation, always at moments of greatest need, as if someone knew precisely when to send them. Another letter described how these children not only possessed advanced knowledge, but also seemed to anticipate the orphanage's needs before they were voiced, as if they had studied the situation in detail before arriving. Armed with all this evidence, Emma and Jake began to piece together a theory about what had truly transpired at St. Mary's Children's Home. They met with Dr. Robert Chen to discuss their findings. Emma presented a timeline they had created, showing a consistent pattern. Whenever the orphanage faced a crisis, epidemics, food shortages, financial difficulties, children with specific knowledge to address those problems appeared. Jake added that these children always disappeared after the crisis passed, leaving no trace in official records. Dr. Chen reviewed the evidence and acknowledged that it suggested some kind of organized effort to provide targeted assistance. But who could have orchestrated such a program, and how did they know exactly when and what kind of help was needed? Dr. Chen speculated that there might have been a network of institutions sharing resources, as philanthropic organizations of the era sometimes coordinated their efforts. However, further research revealed no evidence of such a network. No other local institutions reported similar patterns, and there were no records of formal communication between St. Mary's and other orphanages. Emma proposed a different theory. Perhaps a secret organization, possibly a group of wealthy benefactors, was training children for specific missions. This would explain the specialized knowledge, Jake admitted, but why the secrecy, and why only St. Mary's? Their investigation of financial records uncovered something telling. Between 1887 and 1892. The orphanage received significant anonymous donations that consistently arrived just before or after the crisis they had identified. Someone, Emma concluded, was closely monitoring the orphanage's situation, aware of precisely when and what kind of assistance to send. Dr. Chen urged them to investigate further, examining records from other institutions of the era for similar patterns, and exploring wealthy Boston families who might have had the resources to mount such an effort. Their theory began to crystallize in an organized, well-funded group had operated in secret, dispatching specially trained children on short-term missions to provide targeted support. Emma and Jake widened their investigation to include records from other charitable institutions in Boston during the same period. Orphanages, hospitals, and schools. Their discoveries were telling. Boston Children's Hospital had noted the occasional appearance of young volunteer assistants during medical emergencies between 1888 and 1893, who displayed advanced medical knowledge but vanished without employment records. An industrial school for girls had documented visits from exchange students who taught more efficient sewing and cooking techniques, yet there was no record of which institutions had sent them. It's a pattern, Jake observed. Someone was dispatching trained young people specifically to institutions in need. Their inquiry into wealthy Boston families led them to the New England Philanthropic Society, a private organization coordinating charitable efforts among the region's wealthiest families. Within the society's archives, they found references to a specialized assistance program directed by an anonymous committee of benefactors, which selected and trained young people to provide targeted help to struggling institutions. An 1891 report noted the program's remarkable effectiveness in resolving institutional crises. Participants, the report stated, received intensive training in specific skills before being assigned to short-term missions. Jake uncovered additional details. Participants were chosen for their exceptional intelligence and adaptability, with training encompassing accelerated education in basic medicine, food preservation techniques, teaching methods, and crisis management. The program operated from a private property on the outskirts of Boston, though the specific location records had been redacted. This explains everything, Emma said. The special children at St. Mary's were participants in this clandestine training program. Dr. Foster, who had been assisting with their research, provided the broader historical context. During the 1880s and 1890s, there was a movement among wealthy Boston families to professionalize charity, believing traditional philanthropy was inefficient and seeking more scientific methods to aid the poor. The Specialized Assistance Program, she explained, was a product of that philosophy. Instead of merely donating money, they invested in training individuals to solve institutional problems. Emma and Jake eventually located the property where the program had operated. Land records showed it had belonged to the Thornton family, one of Boston's wealthiest dynasties of the 19th century. The site, now a state park, still held the foundations of several buildings demolished in the 1920s. With park authorities' permission, they conducted a limited archaeological dig. They uncovered physical evidence of the program, buried educational materials, including advanced medical textbooks, food conservation manuals, and teaching guides, all dated between 1885 and 1895. Even more striking, they found photographs of the program in action, showing young people similar in age to the St. Mary's children engaged in intensive training. Medical classes, cooking practice, problem-solving exercises. Jake pointed to one image of about 20 young people posed before a training building. "These are the special children from St. Mary's," he said. Emma recognized several faces from the orphanage photographs. They weren't ordinary orphans. They were students in a philanthropic training program. The final documents revealed the program's full structure. Participants were selected from regional orphanages for their exceptional intelligence, brought to the training center for periods ranging from 6 months to 2 years, and then graduated to specific missions. A program manual described how graduates would be temporarily inserted into institutions facing crisis, their specialized training enabling them to provide effective solutions while maintaining their cover as ordinary residents. After completing their missions, graduates would either be placed with carefully selected adoptive families or return to the program for further training. The program operated successfully for about a decade before being discontinued in 1895, with records indicating that changes in child labor laws and increased public scrutiny had made it unviable. "It's brilliant," Jake admitted. They used the existing orphanage infrastructure to conceal a specialized crisis worker training program. Emma returned to the original St. Mary's photograph, focusing on the child with the strange object in his hand. It was likely some kind of tool or instrument he had learned to use during his training. The investigation had uncovered not a supernatural mystery, but an innovative social program that operated in secrecy during America's Gilded Age. Emma and Jake presented their findings at a Boston Historical Society conference, drawing historians, genealogists, and descendants of families connected to St. Mary's. Their research had revealed a previously unknown chapter in the history of American philanthropy. Emma explained that the Specialized Assistance Program represented an early experiment in what we now call evidence-based philanthropy. Wealthy families investing in systematic solutions, rather than traditional charity. Dr. Foster added historical perspective, noting that the program anticipated modern social work and crisis management by decades, essentially training specialized social workers a century before the profession was formalized. Descendants of the involved families responded with a mix of pride and surprise. Margaret Sullivan Chen remarked that she now understood why her great-grandmother had always insisted her time at St. Mary's was special. She wasn't just an orphan, she was part of an innovative program. The research also traced the fates of many participants. After their missions, Most were placed with carefully selected adoptive families, many from middle-class backgrounds that valued education. Many of these children went on to become community leaders, doctors, teachers, social workers, reformers. The program not only resolved immediate crises but also cultivated a generation of civic leaders. Dr. Robert Chen announced plans to establish a research program to further study the specialized assistance program's methods, which he believed could offer modern applications in disaster response and humanitarian work. Emma and Jake donated all their photographs and documents to the Smithsonian, where an exhibition on 19th century philanthropic innovation was established, with the original St. Mary's photograph as its centerpiece. At the exhibition opening, Emma reflected that history is full of innovators who operated outside traditional systems. Jake added that the program was decades ahead of its time, showing that sometimes historical mysteries have extraordinary but entirely earthly explanations. The photograph that had launched their investigation now hung in the museum with a new plaque. St. Mary's Children's Home, 1888. This image documents both regular orphanage residents and participants in the Specialized Assistance Program, an innovative philanthropic experiment that trained young people to solve institutional crises. The child with the mysterious object had been identified as Thomas Mackenzie, who had completed specialized medical training and was sent to St. Mary's during an influenza epidemic. The object in his hand was a primitive medical instrument he had learned to use in his training. The story of St. Mary's ended not as an unsolved enigma, but as a testament to the innovation and dedication of philanthropists who had worked in secrecy to improve the lives of society's most vulnerable. Their legacy lived on through generations of descendants who continued public service work, and through the lessons their methods provided for modern humanitarian workers.